Hi, my name is Melanie Brits. I am a soul journey coach. So I work a lot in the Akashic records with my clients and their energy, soul contracts, blocks, patterns that's reoccurring that's maybe connected to past lives or even the current energy strands that are sort of being braided together in terms of your soul growth in this life. So recently, Aaron Doughty, a YouTuber, made a video about the Akashic records and specifically focusing more on the Akashic records and time and how basically the past, present, future, all of that is the same in a way, and all of that is accessible in the Akashic records. And this idea of when you are changing something in your current life, it's also changing your past lives or the energy of that, and you're also possibly changing future lives. And so it's almost this idea of parallel universes in a way, or timelines. And so I would highly recommend that you, before you looking at this, watching Aaron's video about that, which I will link in the comments below, and also my previous video that I did that explains the basics of the Akashic records, how we work with it, some stories about what clients of mine have experienced in terms of their soul journeys and the readings that they had, the stuff that we found that was happening in terms of their soul, this current life, and so on. So the first part that I just need to almost repeat that was in the previous video that I did about just the basic Akashic records that you need to understand in terms of wanting to work with it or understand more about it, is that we're talking about past lives, but I've come to realize and experience that it actually is concurrent lives. So that means that when you are experiencing something that happened in a past life, let's say you were a witch and you were tortured and killed for your beliefs and actions in that life, even though your actions might not have been anything bad, just they weren't congruent with what the controlling religion at the time was thinking or believing or allowing. And so I explained how one of my clients had this past life where she was hung and killed, and then her body was left up there as a warning, and how she had this witch wound, which is a thing I think that the spiritual community talks about a lot, and which a lot of healers, energy workers, light workers are experiencing at the moment. It's this thing that causes fear or hesitation to speak out about your spiritual beliefs, especially if it's not the same or accepted that much by the main religious belief system of the day. And that's called the witch wound. I think there's books, there's lots of stuff about it if you want to Google it. I myself had a past life, at least one that I know of, as a witch, and was tortured and killed very horribly as a result of this. And so that is sort of an idea of stuff that we have to work through that can cause energy blocks for us in this lifetime. Having said that, though, the analogy that I used with this is it's almost like sometimes we view this like we view trauma in our childhood. So it's this thing that happened that caused psychological trauma. However, it's something that already happened, it's past, it's done. So you just need to sort of deal with it, deal with it. As bad as it was, it's not like it's happening now. It's done. It's in the past. Our linear view of time informs sometimes our perspective about the trauma of these things. And in the Akashic records and in life, actually, time is not real. So what I want you to understand firstly is that this thing of it's not a past life, it's a concurrent life. You are still connected very much to the energy of that specific life. And what happens then is that your soul is still experiencing that trauma in real time as we speak. And you are, so in the case of my client that was hung, her body is still hanging there. Her soul is still experiencing the trauma of her community, family, friends, etc., turning on her and killing her in this way. So there's a real energy of betrayal and pain, abandonment, distrust that goes along with this event that happened, and that her soul is still experiencing as if it is happening right now. Somebody is killing her, somebody else, and it's like it's happening now. It's not like there's a distance. There's not that distance in time, actually. And so time in the Akashic records is layered. So it's all like the past, present, future, all of it is sort of stacked on top of each other. And that is one of the reasons why we can't ask time questions in the Akashic records, which sometimes frustrates my clients, because they want to know how long until this, or, how long for that. And we can't. So I can try and give it an idea of how close it feels, whether it feels imminent or if it feels far away. However, what we are tapping into when we are reading the Akashic records is a lot about the soul's current energy. And that is the main thing that you need to understand here as well. If you doing a tarot reading or even a psychic reading, where there's predictions regarding the future, what the reader is tapping into is the energy, the current energy, and the probabilities or possibilities that's connected quite the strongest to that. All it takes for you to actually change that is to change the energy, or to change the decision that you make. And that changes the whole ball game. And so as that potential shifts, the energy shifts, and then that old prediction is no longer valid. And that is probably why a lot of the energetic future predictions, psychic predictions, maybe don't come true, is because we individually have shifted our timelines, or the world collectively shifted its timeline. And so it's like this infinite possibility of realities for us and for the world. And where we are is less an aspect of time and more an aspect of our energetic vibration, and the energetic vibration that is connected to or related to whatever the stuff is that we connected to, that's calling in. So this stuff is sort of almost magnetic, so it calls in stuff that vibrates on the same level as it almost. So I have a bit of a history with time, and so part of what I want to look at in this video is just give you some data points about my journey and understanding of time. And then I also want to go into what I learned as a result of my investigations about the quantum physics that surrounds all this, and how that maybe can help us understand the Akashic records, time, how life, the universe, and everything else works. So the first thing, my time travel story. When I think it was 2016, I had this download from my guides that I needed to write a book. And it sort of was about spiritual concepts, healing, etc. Now, what you need to understand is that I grew up in a very Christian childhood and upbringing, quite conservative farming community in the Free State in South Africa. I had a relatively happy childhood, especially happy in terms of my family life, maybe less happy in terms of my sort of surroundings and environment and school, etc. And so then I went to university, and there was a point sort of mid-university where a lot of stuff happened in a short amount of time that was really traumatic for me, and involved the divorce of my parents. I had a childhood friend that was killed violently. I lost a relationship that I cared about. And so there was a lot of, my mom tried to commit suicide. There was a lot of trauma. And so I almost felt like I spent the next 20 years after that just healing from this trauma and finding a way back into my body, into my emotions that I had completely blocked out, and slowly discovering methods like tapping or meditation or working with my dreams, lots of different sort of entry-level spiritual techniques that had helped me heal. And so the calling for me was to write a book about these things. And so I spent months and months and months researching and writing about these things, but it just felt like very hard work to actually write this. Then one day I had a breakthrough when I realized that somebody told me that I needed to stop writing this for other people and I needed to write it for myself. And I realized in that moment, I had this sort of flash of inspiration, that I needed to write it for myself literally. So what I did is the whole book changed and became me having a conversation with my past self. And it was my past self that was at university before all the very traumatic stuff had happened. That was quite happy and going to class with the book bag and happy with her friends and going out and so on. And I was talking to that past self of mine. And the entire book is a conversation in terms of my future, let's call it present version, at that time, talking to the past version of me about stuff that would happen, about techniques, about wisdom, lessons learned, etc. And it was actually quite a fascinating book in the end. Although right now I see it as very basic, or very almost like a spiritual primer type of thing. But it was actually fun to write. But so I spent probably 6 to 8 months immersing myself in this very intense conversation that I was having with this past self of mine. And it wasn't just a literary device. It felt like I was having an actual conversation and sharing of wisdom, sharing of knowledge, sharing of understanding, sharing of love with this past self of mine. And I remember in the foreword of the book where I started the conversation, I actually connected to a moment where in that past self version of mine, I'm walking to journalism class and I have my book bag and so on, and I see her in front of me, and I have so much compassion and almost heartbreak for what that aspect of mine or that version of me will be going through quite shortly, unbeknownst to her. And so the book came together and it was published, and maybe 6 months after that, I was looking through some poems that I'd written while I was in university. So at the time, that was one of my main processing methods as I was writing poetry. A lot. And some of it wasn't really good poetry either. But it was a therapeutic mechanism. It was enabling me to get in touch with my emotions and express. And there was a beautiful quality to quite a lot of them. And I was reading through these poems and remembering and, just accessing the memories and so on. And I came across this poem that I'd written at that time, before all this traumatic stuff happened to me, where I actually say in the poem that I was walking from my hostel to class today, and then suddenly before me I saw a future version of myself, and she was looking at me with these fiery eyes, and I wondered, what does she think of me? How does she see the world differently to me? And wishing that there could be some sort of a conversation, in terms of her just sharing some soul wisdom with me. And I'd written that poem at the time that I was focusing on in the book writing process, but I didn't remember writing that poem at all. I didn't remember the incident. When I read the poem again, I remembered the incident and sort of walking around and almost having a vision of a future aspect of myself, and sort of wondering, what would she think of me and what I'm doing? What, there's a call for understanding and, a sharing of a moment there. And when I read that poem, it blew my mind, because it almost confirmed for me that I had somehow traveled back in time from this present aspect of mine to communicate and share something in that moment. I was really there. That past aspect of mine had felt it and had noted it in her rambling scribblings. And so that started my interest in time and trying to figure out what the hell time actually is. And so what I then started researching was a whole lot of stuff about quantum physics. I also got quite involved in mindfulness, because mindfulness is about time. It's sort of being in the present, not sort of sending your energy out into the future, trying to control it, not ruminating about the past. And it's something that we don't do enough of, because ultimately whatever power we have is only in this moment. We don't, from here we have the power to affect the future and the past and everything. But if you are sort of projecting your energy into the future, you can't affect it there. So there's something in terms of presence and mindfulness that I discovered on this journey. And so along the way, in terms of my research into quantum physics, I found this book, which is called The Field by Lynn McTaggart. And she's an investigative journalist that went on a very involved, complicated, long journey of looking at the latest quantum physics and quantum research that's being done in the world, and how the sort of research that these leading scientists at some of the major universities of the world is informing or having these weird findings that they are experiencing in their research, and it's stuff that will actually turn our whole understanding of the world on its head. Except that it's not really necessarily making its way into the mainstream understanding of how things work. So they discover this weird thing, and then it doesn't really change. Our understanding of time and the world is stuck almost in a Newtonian version of the world. And then after that we had Einstein, and that sort of informed a little bit but didn't change that much. And then we had quantum physics, and that should have changed it quite a lot, but somehow we remain stuck with sort of this Newtonian vision of time, health, physical health and sickness, etc. And so there's a few things that I want to share with you from this book. And the one is about quantum entanglement. And this was something that Einstein already had discovered. So I want to read to you from this book just a few of the conclusions, and there's one scientific experiment that I want to tell you about. And then I'll pull it all back together, I hope, in maybe explaining a bit more about what I think the Akashic Records is and how time works in the records. But I think there's some stuff here that's very interesting. So, quantum physicists discovered a strange property in the subatomic world. It's called non-locality. It refers to the ability of a quantum entity, such as an individual electron, to influence another quantum particle instantaneously over any distance. It could be light years away, despite there being no exchange of force or energy. And it suggested that quantum particles, once in contact, remain or retain a connection even when separated, so that the actions of one will always influence the other, no matter how far they are separated. And Albert Einstein called this sort of thing that they discovered that happens spooky action at the distance. Spooky action at a distance. So what they're talking about is quantum entanglement. This thing that they found where particles or electrons or different little packets of energy can get entangled with each other, and they then remain entangled even though they might be separated by distance or time, I think, because time is not real. So this quantum entanglement is, for me, one of the explanations, I think, in terms of how we affect the world. There's another thing that I'll get to in terms of just our consciousness, our coherence, intention, and that sort of stuff. But if there's this entanglement that happens with different particles, and say, for instance, a bunch of particles get entangled and they form the world or belief systems in terms of the world, I think that it's possible that if we, as the consciousness, which is the deciding factor in a lot of these interactions, which I'll explain a little bit more about, if there is enough of these that get entangled, in terms of maybe a bunch of people with consciousness and coherence, which I'll also get to later, and they start believing in Bigfoot, then these particles might get entangled enough to actually then create a Bigfoot. So part of what I get from this is that we create stuff with our beliefs. And if there's enough people that believe quite strongly that a specific thing happens, it's almost like that thing is created out of the potentiality that is underlying the universe. So there's an entanglement that is happening in terms of that. And so my other theory, this is also speculation on my part, but is that if we're looking at enlightenment in terms of our soul, then maybe it is about disentangling some of these particles that we have attached to in terms of beliefs or karma, trauma, heaviness, and that maybe enlightenment is us becoming less entangled with some of these particles that we entangled with in some of our lifetimes, or as a soul, or as a result of indoctrination that we experienced when we were born into the world, which has a lower vibration. So we had to undergo some sort of a process in order to actually get here. And so that's just my current working theory on what enlightenment and our sort of spiritual growth process actually is, as well as the fact that I think it has to do with us learning how to use our consciousness in an aligned, creative, coherent way. Yes. Okay, so that's entanglement. I also wanted to tell you about the consciousness. So let me get to that experiment that I wanted to share with you. Okay, so the scientist that did this experiment is named Helmut Schmidt, and he was looking at the possibility of turning back time. So he had some machine set up, and he found that there was a defiance of space or causation. And so people could affect the outcome of the machine. So he had these machines that made clicks, and it would either click in the left ear or the right ear of the headphones of the sound. And it's almost a random thing, the distribution of whether it's right click or left click. It's a randomizer machine or whatever that's creating it. And if he then goes back and he listens to the control tapes, then it's random. It's almost the same amount of left or right clicks. However, if you listen to it while the machine is doing its output, there's an observer of this process that's trying to intentionally create a pattern where there's more right clicks. Then for some strange reason, that actually is the output of the machine. So the human observer and the intention of is affecting the randomness of this pattern. So, but that is in present time. So what he now does is he does this recording of the clicks, and he creates various control tapes of them. So now we have random clicks in both ears. Nobody's listened to it, but there's control tapes of this process, so that he can go and check what was the actual outcome of this experiment at the time. And then he gives the tapes a few days later. He actually gives the tapes to a volunteer to take home and go and listen to it, while telling the volunteers, while you're listening to it, try and affect whether it's right or left click. And then what he finds is that once the observer listens to it with the intention that there should be more right clicks, then the tape actually captures more right clicks, even though the tape was in time created several days ago. And so the influence of the consciousness reached back in time, and it affected the randomness of the machine at the time when it was first recorded. They didn't change what had happened. They affected what would have happened in the first place. They went back to the sort of root cause or something. And so if anybody heard the tape first and listened with focused attention, then the system seemed to make it less susceptible to influence later. So there's more of a susceptibility sort of at the root event, rather than if somebody had already influenced it and sort of set it. It's like it had the potential, and then your intention, your attention, your observation of it, your thinking about it, actually changed the randomness of it, and it sort of set it more. So somebody else listening to it later couldn't really affect it as much as you, as the first observer, could actually do it. Okay, so that is very interesting. And so in terms of this, there were 3 possible scenarios that he then sort of explored and said. The first one is that it's almost like a deterministic universe. So where everything that was going to happen had already happened. So there's fixed determinacy. And if people, for instance, in this had a psychic premonition, then it's basically just tapping into some information that's already available because it already happened. But then the second possibility is also a possibility in terms of the known theories and laws of the universe. So there's a phenomenon in quantum physics that's called retarded and advanced waves, the so-called Wheeler-Feynman absorber theory, that says that a wave can travel backward in time from the future to arrive at its source. And what happens between two electrons is this. One electron jiggles a bit and it sends out radiating waves both into the past and the future. And the future wave would hit a future particle, which would then also wiggle and send out its own advanced and retarded waves. And the two sets of waves from these electrons would cancel out, except in the region between them. And the end result of a wave from the first one traveling backward and the wave from the second one traveling forward is an instantaneous connection. And so this scientist, Radin, speculated that it could be on a quantum level that we are sending out waves to meet our own future. And then the third possibility is, which I actually am believing, is that everything in the future already exists on some bottom rung level in the realm of pure potential. And that in seeing into the future or in the past, we're helping to shape it and bring it into being. Just as we do with a quantum entity in the present with an act of observation. And so the information transfer via subatomic waves doesn't exist in time or space, but it's somehow spread out and ever present. The past and present are blurred into one vast here and now, so your brain picks up signals and images from the past or the future. And the future exists in some nebulous state that we may begin to actualize in the present. And so this makes sense if we consider, and this is actually what is the truth, that all subatomic particles exist in a state of all potential unless it's observed. And observing the same goes for thinking about it. So in the research, they actually found that theoretically we have access to information, past and future. They had actually people seeing remote viewing locations, and then they managed to see 50 years into that location's past, stuff that was there, but of which there's now currently no sign. So we can see into the past or future, but we are also able to influence quantum events, which implies that we are able to affect events or moments other than in the present. And so it's more susceptible or relevant for things that they call seed moments, the first of a chain of events. And linking this, for instance, to physical mental health, it could mean that we could use the field, and I'll explain what the field is now, to direct influences back in time to alter pivotal moments or initial conditions that later bloom into full-blown problems or disease. So you can go back to the inception moment, and that is a lot what we do in terms of working in the Akashic records anyway, is we go back to where the problem first started, the inception point of that problem. I explained it in the previous video. It's the tree trunk of the pattern, not the branch, because we can't affect the branch as easily. We have to go back to where it started. I think that is quite interesting. I also want to tell you just about coherence, because I believe coherence is one of the important things. That the coherence of consciousness represents the greatest form of order known to nature. And this order may help to shape and create order in the world. And when we wish for something or intend something, it's an act that requires a great deal of unity of thought, and in a sense our own coherence may be infectious. So they did a lot of studies that suggest that reality is created by each of us only by our attention. And so at the lowest level of mind and matter, each of us creates the world. Okay, so the field is this energetic, let's see, page 26. It's a 0-point field that they talk about in quantum physics. That's a kind of shadow of the universe, a mirror image that records everything that ever was. Now, that sounds a lot to me like the Akashic records are. Pure energy, as it exists at the quantum level, does not have time or space, but exists in a vast continuum of fluctuating charge. We, in a sense, are time and space. When we bring energy to conscious awareness through the act of perception, we create separate objects that exist in space through a measured continuum. And by creating time and space, we create our own separateness. So I think that's actually quite groundbreaking. Let's move you slightly closer. Okay. So what this means for me is that our consciousness is almost the deciding factor in all of this. And I think that, you know, how we have these experiences of the Mandela effect, for instance, which is these subtle changes of the world that we sort of remember differently. I had one experience of this actually myself, where I was driving through this main street of Somerset West, where I lived, every day for a number of years. So I traveled this road to go to work every day. And so I knew it well. I knew the environment really well. And then one day I was driving there, and suddenly there's this big new building that's suddenly there. And yesterday when I was driving there, that building wasn't there. I can promise you. It's not that I just never paid attention to it. It's actually quite an eye-catching building. And it definitely wasn't there before. And so you'll find lots of examples on this. If you just Google Mandela effect, there's lots of videos and TikToks and stuff about it. But what I think is happening there is it's almost proof that we are shifting through these almost parallel universes the whole time, just through our intentions. And I believe that there's certain levels. So the lowest level of vibration is physical stuff. And then if we go slightly higher, then we have the sort of more spiritual parts of it, or emotions, etc. And you can't affect the physical without almost going to the next level above it, and then the next level above it, and the next level above it. So in order for us to create change in the physical, we have to go one level above, and we have to go to the realm of energy, of spirit. And then from there, we have to have coherence. And that coherence is in terms of our thoughts, in terms of our energy, our heart and mind have to work together. And the more coherent we are in terms of our intention, the more coherent the effect is that we have in the world. And there's also something there just in terms of our coherence can entrain other energies that are less coherent than us. So the more coherent energy in a battle will always win if you have because it will almost entrain the less coherent energy into that. And I think part of what is happening, for instance, with healing, is that maybe the healer have more coherent energy than the patient, the person that's being healed. And the energy almost entrains and shows the less coherent energy how to be, in a sense. I have read books like the I can't remember the name of it. It's Diary of a Yogi, or that book. There's a lot of stuff there in terms of that almost signifies this almost entrainment of a less coherent energy by a more coherent energy. And so I think the physical world is the heaviest, densest vibration, and the one that's least affected by consciousness or change or intention. And there's a thing in terms of just continuity. So if we want to shift our reality, then it's easier to shift it to slightly adjoining, that's just slightly different and almost course correct, than moving from this to this, which is far away in terms of time or space or possibility or vibration. So making gradual changes to your life, your energy, your trajectory, etc., I think is the better way to go than trying to go from here to here. So if you're talking about manifestation, you don't have enough money, but so figure out how to get slightly more rather than how to win the lottery, if I can put. So it's more likely that you'll be able to make a slight shift in energy that will bring you to this timeline where there's slightly more energy. And then you can from there shift to one where there's even slightly more and slightly more, rather than trying to go from here to here. It's like there's no easy pathway that still respects the continuity of your experience or the world around you that's already been entangled. And so I think we have to make smaller adjustments to our visions and our intentions, and focus on shifting our realities little bit by bit by bit, rather than trying to make the big shift. The big shift is important in terms of knowing where we want to go, but not in terms of the intentional shifting in the moment, if I can put it like that. I had a reading with a client this week that was quite interesting in terms of this as well. And she had a question that she wanted to ask. And her question was, is this my last lifetime? Is this my final lifetime? Will I reach enlightenment? What they showed me is if there was another life that was needed in order for her to finalize working through these energies and stuff, then it could actually be quite a more gentle, less challenging one, because it's the last little bit. A lot of the hard stuff had already sort of been done. And they showed me that when she has that next life, she might not have it in what we would deem the future. She might move back in time to a simpler, slower, more pastoral, less technological time in the world, in our history. And so they showed it to me like it's like Epcot Center almost. So I once visited it in Florida, and it's basically almost like a giant theme park, and you have these different areas that you can access in the park, and each of these different areas is like a different country. So you get a little passport, and then you get stamps as you go through and experience all these countries. But so you're visiting Mexico, and then there's these pyramids and Aztec, Inca stuff and all of that stuff. And then you're visiting Spain, and the buildings there look different, and the food that you get there is different, and it's almost like you're enveloped within this little Spanish world or inside the Mexico world. And you're experiencing the Canada one was also quite nice. But so the whole world, the statues, the imagery, the buildings, the environment changes. And so they showed me that our soul and choosing our lives is almost like visiting the Epcot Center. So it's like you have the central thing, and then you can go anywhere from there. So she might decide to go back to the Middle Ages and have quite a simple life there in terms of this, because she already gained enough spiritual knowledge that might have been only available to the masses later years, and she doesn't need to have that in her next life again. She can just focus on, I don't know, a relationship or integrating all of the knowledge. That it depends on what your soul wants and what the soul's needs are in that next life. And then it's almost like choosing the most conducive environment that would give you the elements that you need to actually work with the specific energies. And so my next life might be, you know, in the Dark Ages, or it might, you know, go back way, way beyond. So our lives are not chronological. So if you had a life, for instance, in the 1700s, your next life could be in the 1100s, or, you know, 2,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago. Our lives, although they are, some of them come later in terms of our soul development, let's call it that, they are not necessarily chronological in terms of the history of the world, that sort of thing. So it's almost like our soul is this beautiful crystal that has a lot of different sides or facets. And like a living, breathing crystal, you know how crystals are formed, they grow. We can add extra little parts of the crystal to reflect and explore other aspects of our being. And so one side of that crystal is you right now, but you're connected through your higher self or oversoul, whatever you want to call that, to all of the others. And you can access the wisdom and knowledge and beauty, love, etc. from all of the others, the gifts especially. So it's not only the, you know, about releasing the trauma or the energy blocks that stem from other lives. We have had lives where there are gifts and abilities that we can access if we tap into the records. And so my last thing that I just want to say about the this whole quantum view of the Akashic records is no, there's one other thing before I get to the twin flame thing. One of the comments on the video by Aaron was that, okay, but then nothing really matters, and then you can just shift and shift and shift and shift. I don't think it's as easy as just mental shifting and deciding, oh, I want to, you know, okay, I have this physical ailment, so that's fine, I'll just shift out of it. Because there's almost like gravity that develops around certain beliefs or certain of these entanglements that we have. And the more gravity it has, the harder it is to actually shift out of it. The more work it is for you, the clearer your intention, vibration, etc. has. Coherence need to be in order to shift out of that. And then I think there's also this continuity thing where we shift, but we can't just change the whole thing because that would blow the map. So we need to shift in increments. So I think we're always shifting. However, it doesn't mean that eventually you'll end up a totally different person with different relatives and different people in your past than you were. I think there is a continuity at play here, and it's not that easy to disentangle these electrons or particles that already got entangled. Now, in terms of the entanglement of these particles that we get in quantum physics, there's something there, I think, maybe about the whole twin flame journey, where you have these two souls that are mirroring each other and experiencing the same energy and lessons, and actually one soul that's sort of split into, I don't know, masculine, feminine, or whatever you want. I think a lot of the information that we get about that is BS anyway, but I saw a post by, healer that works quite a lot with the twin flame journey. Her name is Meg from Arcadia Living or Healing, and she had a nice perspective on the sort of twin flame thing in terms of time. And then when I read that, I sort of realized something in terms of that I just wanted to share with you to end off this whole very metaphysical exploration of time and the Akashic records. So if you have a twin flame journey, or these two souls that have done countless lifetimes together, and in some of them they are in separation, and in some of them they are in union, because union is like the end goal of the journey. What you need to understand is if in this lifetime you are moving closer to union with your twin flame, then it almost certainly will affect all of the other lives where you are currently not in union. And so the goal of union is a collective goal for countless other lifetimes that are happening concurrently. And your movement into greater union within yourself and your relationship, but especially self, in this lifetime moves the mark for the others as well. And so the overall level of unity increases by the actions that you do in this lifetime, and makes it more likely for the others, because in unity there's a greater coherence. Remember, we talked about that. And so that coherence can entrain some of the others into greater coherence in terms of the relationship and the energy, the energy between them. And so that's my perspective on twin flames. Hopefully this wasn't too rambling or weird. The takeaway from it is that time is really not real, not in quantum physics, not in the Akashic records. Our perception of it is not the reality of how things work, and you almost need to leave it out of the equation. The other thing I think that is quite important is to realize that our consciousness is like the deciding factor. And it almost makes me think that if we are here living this world, in order for that to exist and for those particles not to go back to their state of endless possibility, there has to be a consciousness observing them, and that consciousness maybe split itself and created us, and we are in a sense then extensions of the God consciousness, creator consciousness, let's call it that, that's experiencing itself and observing itself and creating new thought forms and possibilities and worlds and so on all the time. And maybe that is why the universe keeps expanding, because we all keep creating new possibilities, exploring new possibilities, and thinking up fantastic new things to bring into being by entangling some of those particles, vibrations. Anyway, namaste. I hope this finds you well. Let me know in the comments what you think. Of course, all of this is mostly speculation and my own experience, and then thrown in with a dash of quantum physics and research thrown in. But then what we extrapolate from there is anyone's guess.